Alrighty everyone, so we're going to go ahead and start off with the generator rebuild. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually spray some brake cleaner on one of my cloths here and wipe off the connection to the engine. The reason I'm doing this is I coated this with oil because it keeps it from rusting. Since the humidity level is very high where I live, since I exposed this metal, I wanted to keep it from rusting so that it has a smooth surface to adhere to when the rotor is attached. So I want to get all that oil off of there now and make sure it's very, very clean. It's a good trick to use if you have to have bare metal outside for a little while, because in Florida, or at least in high humidity areas, it will rust quicker than you think. Alright, that's pretty much clean. So we're going to go ahead and start attaching the rotor first so that we can get this show on the road. I have it right here. This is the brand new rotor that I went out and got shipped to me by a friend. What I'm going to do first here is I'm going to clean the inside and make sure it's clean to match up with this, and we're going to go ahead and get this kind of seated on here. We're going to run the bolt. I have the massive 10-inch bolt here that goes through the center of this and screws into this here. So we're going to secure it but not tighten it all the way, because we want to have a little bit of wiggle room for when we end up putting on the bell housing. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn this over. And we're just going to make sure there's no debris or dust or anything inside the mating surface. So we're going to grab a new cloth here. Hit it with some brake cleaner. And we're going to get it in there. All that's dirt that would have ended up being on the mating surface and getting in our way a little bit. You want these two to really have a good connection with each other. Any dirt or debris in there could actually cause slippage, if anything, in the future. And brake clean is alcohol based, so it dries very quickly, allowing it to be a very efficient cleaner. So you can find it at any auto parts store, so if you're doing this, brake clean will probably be your best friend, especially if your set's very dirty. Alright everyone, let's get ready to attach the rotor now. We're going to pick it up and slide it over the spindle. And just make sure that it kind of seats itself. Keep a hand on it because you don't want it to slide off the taper. We're going to put this bolt and thread it in and start spinning that. Alright, once that's in, now you know that it can't fall off. So we're going to get our tool that we're going to use to crank that down. So go ahead and grab your ratcheting wrench or whatever you're going to use. I'm going to just kind of hand tighten this. Okay, I'm not going to go anywhere super tight. And now I'm going to take, if you don't have a rubber hammer, I have a 3-pound rubber hammer here, which is good for hitting this on the front because you won't bend or dent the metal, and you want to hit it square on the front here. Then put a piece of wood on top of here and hit it with a standard hammer that you would have around your home. I'm going to tap this in. This just ensures that this seats the best it can onto that spindle. Of course, we will tighten this bolt down at the end of the day, which will seat it for sure. But we want just a little bit of wiggle room. That wiggle room can be beneficial to us. So it's a little bit loose now, so I can tighten it a little bit more. We're going to leave this bolt loose, so it's just kind of like that. So this can kind of do its thing. So now we have a little bit of wiggle room on it. Alrighty, So that's attached now. That's how you attach your rotor before we get the bell housing on. Next, let's switch over our focus to the bell housing. I'm going to clean the area in which the bearing seats itself into, and I'm going to put a thin layer of oil on that area while everything falls off my bench. So what I'm going to do is just get some more brake clean and clean the surface on the inside. Now, in the previous video where I actually installed the bearing and uninstalled it that I hit this on the inside with sandpaper to ensure that the surface was nice and smooth and had no issues to mount the bearing to. So all I really need to do now is just kind of take the debris off of it. I'll do the same thing to the bearing here in a moment. And then we're going to coat them with oil to help it adhere better. So let's clean this one here off too. Alright, our bearing is pretty clean. Okay. So now let's go ahead and coat them with oil. Okay. So this is not the best thing to do in the world, but I'm limited to what I have out here. I do not have any grease of any type, since I just don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my dipstick on the Genset. I'm going to take a little bit of oil and put it on my finger. I'm going to put it on the bearing directly. And while obviously I don't recommend this, I'm doing what I have to in my sense. So take this with a grain of salt if you want. Put a little bit around that front lip there because that's going to be what kind of starts when I start seating it. And I'm going to put another touch on my finger and coat the inner race here. All this is going to do is just help the bearing seat in place. The O-ring that's inside of this will hold it from just pure pressure once this is completely seated, so you don't have to worry about any slippage. So that's what I'm doing here, is just making sure that this is easier to get on. Seating that bearing is not going to be easy since it's a perfect fit. Okay. Next off, let's move up to my next trick, because we're going to start getting ready to put on the bell housing here. So let's move on to that and I'll show you what I'm going to do. Alright everyone, so we're going to install the bell housing now. There is a trick to this because I've seen these type of bolts used before. The 6 bolts that look like this, and they have a nut that goes on them, are designed to go into these holes here, and the nut fits in a perfectly fitted hole behind here so that it can't turn when you're screwing these in. So that way you can torque these really hard because the casing will hold on to the nut for you. Well, sometimes when you're inserting these, you can push the nut out accidentally, and that's a big deal with the ones that are below here, the 2 nuts that are down here at the bottom, because if you push those nuts out, it's going to be a lot harder to get them back in, especially once the bell housing is inserted. So here's a trick that I'll use, and not all of you will have this at home, but there's easier ways to do it, I'm sure. I've done this before with just electrician's tape. I have a really, really thin roll here of masking tape. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take the nut that I'm about to use, and I am going to cover it completely in masking tape. So what I'm doing is I'm rolling the masking tape completely over the nut. And what this is going to do is it's going to increase the thickness of the nut and make it so that when I put it in, it's really hard to fit it into the hole that it sits in. That way it won't want to come out very easily. And once you get your thread started on your bolt, it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm going to completely cover this in masking tape. That should be enough. I'm going to do a test fit. So now that the nut is completely covered in masking tape, I'm going to push it into the hole it sits in behind here. I can kind of feel that that's a pretty firm fit, and if I push on it with a screw head, well, we can thicken that up. You can kind of base the thickness off of, test it with a bolt, see if it comes out easily. If it does, you kind of don't want it to do that because you want it to be pretty thick, so let's add just a little bit more masking tape to this bolt. I did about 3 rounds around it, so I'm guessing 5 is probably the magic number. So just keep on threading it around the bolt as you go along. And the thickness of it will increase, allowing you to keep it in place. This trick is going to be really useful for those bottom bolts because you're not going to be able to get to them that easy. And you're going to wish that you did this trick if you didn't, and then you put the bolts in, they fall out, which would be horrible. So now I got this here. I'm going to line it up, the opening for it. Oh yeah. 4 is the magic number. So you want to wrap it 4 times. Yeah, because now if I go in here and I push, oh yeah, look at that. I can push on it with my finger, and that bolt doesn't pop out. That's what you want. You'll want that to stay still so that you can get all your bolts in without having to worry about them. Alright, so once you have your bolts seated in place and you have them held in so they won't fall out during the install, we're going to go ahead and pick up the bell housing and slide it over the rotor carefully. And once we have it kind of where this bearing here will start to seat itself, we're going to try and thread the bolts, the 4 bolts all the way around it. And to do that, you're going to need a 14 millimeter. I'm using a deep socket. And we're going to go ahead and seat those the best we can. Alright. And just be mindful of your wires. You've got a lot of wires sticking out of this thing. So let's go ahead and pick up the bell housing. We're going to situate it in the direction that it goes over. I'm going to pick up the output wires and kind of hang them out of my way for right now. Alright, first actually, before I forget, let's just do one final cleaning to the mating surfaces. This just ensures that the mating surface is clean and ready to be attached to. If you have heavier duty corrosion in some areas, then you can use a wire brush and just scratch it off. In my case, I actually have a brass brush, so I will kind of just clean that area up a little bit. Just any area where there's major corrosion. And on the bell housing too. Just give it a quick little scrub. going to do one final spray with our brake cleaner and wipe down those surfaces we just cleaned with the brush on there and on the bell housing. So we're just going to clean them around the edges of the bell housing here. I know you probably can't see it, but it's the same edge that meets up with the generator, just to ensure that there is a good connection. Alright, let's go ahead and carefully pick up the bell housing and slide it over the rotor. I'm going to grab it by the end here at the bottom, pick it up, and just slowly bring it over the rotor. Trying to carefully support the weight of it. Okay, they're getting stuck on something. I can't see what it is. Come on. Alright, we're going to back it off. They're getting stuck on something. I feel like it's those weird little rubber things at the bottom here, but I might not be right. We don't want to damage these windings on the rotor. Let's try again. Let's see if I can get it to bypass that area. Not hitting anything in here. No, not hitting anything there. Yeah, what we're hitting is these little rubber mounts down here that were the vibrational dampeners. So I'm going to have to figure out how to get this to pass over those. I think what I'm going to try and do is rotate the rotor in such a fashion that maybe it'll help me kind of slip over and kind of grab those things. And if not, we are going to have to figure something out. Let's try. Third time's a charm, right? Do not want to damage these brand new windings. Okay, let's take a moment's break, try and rethink our plan, and I will come back with a new idea, since this is obviously not working out. Alright everyone, so I learned while trying to install this that basically this engine isn't even mounted at all to this plate. All the mounts are done with the bell housing. So, in lieu of that, I put a little block right here to support the weight of the engine, to lift it up so I can help clear these little rubber bushings. Also, this would really help me earlier, which I had trouble, was putting this bolt behind this bottom one here, which was really hard to get to. So now, just carefully pick up your engine and put a block underneath it to support it so you can get in there and do that. So now we're going to have no trouble at all and get this thing on here nice and smooth. So just take it easy. And there she is. Okay, we're going to need to pound that bearing in place now. But first, let's start threading some of these bolts. We want to get the main 4 bolts in right now to hold this thing in place for us. So let's put the first bolt in. We really don't want this weight resting on the rotor for too long. Okay. First bolt just doesn't want to start. Second one wants to start up for me. bolt in there. Come on, line up. Alright. That one's started. Let's go ahead and run those down, because we want those to help start supporting the weight of the rotor. Oh my gosh, just by screwing those screws down, it's seating the bearing. I guess it's my lucky day, right? We might not have to hammer this bearing in at all. It might just seat itself naturally, which would be the most perfect scenario. So let's go ahead and get these last two bolts in the bottom. They are the hardest bolts to get in, so just be careful with starting them. Okay, that one's first started. Let's get the next one started. Then we'll start slowly torquing them down, not all the way, but kind of start making our way in a circle to evenly seat this bearing all the way. And that should give us a really, really good connection. We might not have to hammer this bearing at all. Let's kind of turn the rotor a little bit to make sure it's seating. Don't turn it too much because it sounds horrible since it's not seated perfectly. We don't really want to damage the rotor, but once we get this in here all the way and the bell housing is in, then we should be safe to rotate the set and get it aligned. Perfect. All four bolts started perfectly. Alright, so now let's start slowly torquing them in order. Let's start with the bottom left. My range of motion on this one's pretty pathetic, but we'll get there. Okay, I can see the bearing starting to move a little bit. Let's do the one adjacent to it. Let's get this one right here. Oh, that bearing starting to seat all the way. Let's get this one over here. So there's no need to hammer the bell housing in place because just tightening the bolts in a sequential order will allow you to seat the bearing perfectly smooth. I'm going to start torquing down this bottom one here all the way. I don't know the exact torque for these, so I'm just going to do them kind of by hand and just make them generally tight because you don't want these to undo themselves over time. So, and then we'll spin the engine and make sure we don't hear any scraping or scratching sounds. You don't want to hear any scraping or scratching sounds on the inside of this. If there is, we're going to have to kind of try to figure out, you might need to move this around and shift it just slightly because the gap between the rotor and the stator is a very small one. And it can definitely be thrown off by something like this. Alright, that bottom left is tight. Let's tighten the final one up here. Alright, that's it. It's completely tightened. Now let's hope we don't hear any scraping. Here we go. Alright. If there is any scraping, it's so small that it is not noticeable. So I'm going to take a look at the bearing here. That looks pretty well seated. I'm going to turn the flywheel to kind of get a good look at it. Turning, if I can. It's a lot easier to turn the flywheel if you take out a spark plug. But in my case, I don't have a spark plug wrench on me. However, I do have a crescent wrench. I think it's not going to work. Let me briefly pause while I go and get a socket to remove my spark plug so I can move my rotor easier. I will be right back. Alright, now we can freely spin our flywheel without having to worry. It did sound like something just scraped. Something's hitting. Now where is it hitting at? Hey everyone. So it might be kind of confusing that all of a sudden I was looking around for a scraping noise and the video jump cuts to now, and the genset's back together again. It is in one piece. So I skipped a couple steps, and sorry guys if you missed out on that, but really it's almost just like the reassembly, it's just like the disassembly. And I'll put a few key notes at the end of my video here on what differences there would be to watch out for when you reassemble. But those of you who might not know, I had difficulty with the rotor, and for those of you who do know, I mean, thank you guys especially out there, because you've helped me a lot to figure out how to fix this thing and figure it out. And it's been about 2 to 3 weeks since this video has now jump cut to right now, so you're seeing this as a seamless video, but it's been a long run for me in this Genset here. So thank you guys out there at Smokestack especially, because I couldn't have been able to make this complete without you guys' help, so thank you. I really appreciate that. But for those of you watching this video to figure out how to fix your set and you're like, oh man, he just jump cut to it being complete, that sucks. Well, to tell you the truth, I already got almost the hard parts done that I showed you all my tips and tricks for that were the best at the beginning of this video before the scraping sound occurred, which was putting this stator housing back together. Anything else would be important would be the brush block, which goes right here. You saw me take the brushes out. Look on the back side of the brush block and be careful where the brushes actually stick out. You'll see where the 2 screw holes are. One screw hole has a wall next to it that the other one doesn't. You need to make sure that that faces downward when you reinstall it, or else it won't fit, or it might fit but it might be kind of janky and you might think, oh, it just goes back that way. No, it doesn't. The little wall, the only thing that's not symmetric about the whole brush block on the back, faces down. That's next to the screw hole. As long as you do that, and that screw hole with the wall is on the bottom, facing downward, you're good. No problems. Other than that, there's only 3 screws that hold on this entire air block assembly with that gasket there and the through bolt right here. You just gotta make sure that your electric choke assembly is good. I actually made a copper fuel line for mine, so that's good. Always make sure to put a thread sealer on these threads if you're going to make a copper fuel line, because I had to transition it from a rubber to a copper. Other than that, just mind your wires and watch when you put this back that you don't crush that little oil pressure sensor wire there. And that's about it, really. It's not that difficult to put back together. It's just basically like the disassembly process. So, well, without further ado, I bet you're guessing that you want to see this thing run. So, I gotta fire it up for a few seconds. I only got a little bit of fuel in the bowl. There's no extra fuel left, so it's only gonna run for a few seconds, but enjoy the sweet music. That's real embarrassing, isn't it? For my set, I don't know why sometimes, but I gotta hold the choke back and then crank it. So, I don't know if any of you guys out there have this issue, but I think I have something to do with my vacuum choke, but I'll figure that out later. But for now, let's just go ahead and get it fired.